Welcome to Longevity Advantage. I'm your host, Scott Fulton. If this is your first time visiting, then a special welcome. Longevity Advantage, our focus is solely around improving health, because it's only by improving health that we build towards a sustainable, long life. And long life is really simply avoiding chronic disease. That's really the simplest way to think about longevity. How do we avoid chronic disease? So leaky gut is absolutely at the core of chronic disease. I'll tell you that in my health education, probably nothing had more impact than when I started to learn about leaky gut, and just how important it is to our daily health today, but also to our long-term health, and just how many diseases link back to leaky gut. So we can think about leaky gut just the way we might think about the screen in our window. It's designed to keep the environmental hazards on the outside, but allow air to pass through because we want to make sure we have fresh air exchange and the CO2 getting out. And we all know that if we get a cut in that screen, then suddenly we're going to find all the environmental aspects that we don't want in our house. We're going to be running around with fly swatters, swatting anything that moves. So in its simplest form, that's how it works. The difference is, instead of thinking about it as air, thinking about the nutrients in the food that we eat, we want those to pass through into our bloodstream, but we don't want to have all the junk and particles and toxins that come with our food. We don't want that stuff getting into our bloodstream. So if that helps you get started, let's dig a little bit deeper into leaky gut. So primarily what we're talking about is our intestinal tract. There's more to our gut than just our intestines, but for today, let's just think about that. And so our intestines are really built with epithelial cells. It's this lovely long tube structure made up of these epithelial cells that form the membrane between the food that we eat and the bloodstream that's right behind them. So in behind all these microvilli are blood vessels. So when food passes through, so it's a permeable membrane, food or the nutrients pass through into the bloodstream and they get absorbed into the bloodstream for our body to use for various purposes. What's really important to know about our epithelial cells or intestinal tract is that it's 100 times larger surface area than our skin. 100 times more surface area than our skin. And instead of being thousands of layers thick like our skin, it's only one layer thick. So that means we're talking about a massive area bigger than a tennis court, only one cell thick, so it's very tender. You don't need a knife to break through that membrane. It'll happen just by foods that we eat and things it gets exposed to. So as we think about a healthy, normal functioning membrane, we see food particles passing through in our intestines. The nutrients get extracted through, or they permeate through. It's a permeable membrane, and they pass through into our bloodstream, and they get carried through our body. Life's good when that's the way it works. Unfortunately, if our food were that clean, we'd all be in a good state, but this is what reality looks like for a lot of us. We have excess bacteria from various forms. It's not the good bacteria, the bad bacteria. We have gluten coming through, viruses, toxins. And what happens with a lot of that is our body has a protein in there called zonulin that triggers when it sees these things. And perhaps the one place where our body is the weakest, and it does this automatically, is it causes these tight junctions that are supposed to be here and nice and tight. It causes these tight junctions to open up. And when that opens up, now it's a free path for all of these toxins and unwanted food particles to pass directly into our bloodstream. And while that may not sound like a big deal, unfortunately what it does is it throws our immune system absolutely into full tilt. So now suddenly our immune system, think about it as your armies to manage any threats that come in. It's now suddenly having to manage threats because it's going to be carried through your bloodstream throughout your body. And so everywhere it's starting to now have to attack this and break it down and try to get rid of it again. And so every time we eat, we get this cycle of release of zonulin gets into our bloodstream, so you can understand how hard that is on our body. And we can think about it as, what does that look like as stress on our body? If I offered you a glass of water, without doubt 100% of you are going to take the clean water for good reason. Well, if we think about what comes out of our intestines, we know it looks a lot more like that. But that's not what we want to have going into our bloodstream. And if we have leaky gut, that's what's happening. We're getting that into our bloodstream when we want to have just nice, clean, nutritious water or food with nutrition getting into our bloodstream. So we can understand pretty simply, I think, around how much stress that's going to put on our bodies as a result. And chronic disease largely comes from stressing our body in various ways. And if we think about leaky gut, now we understand leaky gut impacts the whole body. It's linked to between 30 and 80 diseases, depending on which physician's group you want to talk to. We can tell if we have leaky gut simply by evaluating what's the odor in our stool, how frequently do we go to the bathroom, and what's the texture of that. I know it sounds kind of gross, but these are things that we can do ourselves. This isn't the sort of thing a doctor's going to be able to tell you easily. Leaky gut shows itself in our brains in terms of ADHD and anxiety, for example, or depression. It shows up as skin conditions, think about it like an allergic response that shows up at the skin. It'll show up in thyroid conditions. We'll talk about cell mimicry. Hopefully I'll remember to talk about that in a minute. Shows up as fatigue in our adrenal glands, in our joints with rheumatoid arthritis, fibromyalgia, and headaches. Not surprisingly, it shows up in colon diseases, things like constipation, diarrhea, and irritable bowel syndrome. And if our immune system's on overload, then we shouldn't be surprised that we're going to be a lot more susceptible to colds and flu than we would otherwise. So it really is central to a number of diseases that are common to us. So again, here's the intestine. If our epithelial cells, remember how thin they are and how big that covering is. Now let's take a really, really close look. So this was done by a couple of researchers coming out of University of Virginia research, Dr. John Gildea and Dr. Zach Bush a few years ago. They were using immunofluorescence to look at cells, which really highlights under the microscope these tight junctions. And the tight junctions are illustrated by these green zones that light up. And what they're showing is what's that edge of that epithelial cell look like. And as you see, they're all nicely touching one another, creating a lovely, beautiful membrane, keeping the things that we want on the outside and allowing just the nutrients to pass through. So then they started to look at what are the things that can stimulate leaky gut. And so one of them they looked at was gluten. So gluten, we know, is certainly a reactive material for many of us these days. And so we see this as the normal tight junctions, and then when they exposed it to gluten or gliadin or gliadin, depending which pronunciation you like, we start to see how they open up. And you see how the openings are now in these tight junctions are no longer tight. They've become loose. And as soon as that happens, now we have a direct path from the materials in our intestines through into our bloodstream. They were doing some work on a lignite extract, that's what the LE refers to look at how does that help or reinforce the tight junctions. And what they were able to show in their research was, in fact, that they can largely support or certainly mitigate the impact of things like gluten. So that was really a profound discovery in terms of understanding at a microscopic level, how does leaky gut work? How do these cells maintain contact, and what are the things that cause a breakdown? Some further work I want to share with you just to help demonstrate how we can measure this now is glyphosate. You've heard lots about Roundup in the news, I'm sure, with different things. Well, there's many issues with Roundup, but one of them at its root cause, again, is the glyphosate, which is the active in Roundup. When we expose glyphosate on these cells, we see after 2 minutes, not a lot happening, but after just 16 minutes, take a look at what happened to all those tight junctions. They now suddenly get all separated out, and you can see now, again, we've got a total breakdown of our protective membrane that's supposed to protect us from all those toxins and bacteria and food particles. And worth showing you here, again, with this lignite extract, they were able to show that they could certainly mitigate a lot of the effects of glyphosate as well. So it's really, I think, important research because it's changed the direction of how we can start to think about managing disease. I'll add something on this in the notes below if you're interested in that piece. So if we kind of sum it up here, we're really talking about how do we prevent leaky gut. So we know there's some things now that we can do because we understand the triggers a lot better. So we have all these diseases potentially that we want to be managing against. And remember, these are chronic diseases. You need to be ahead of this, not behind it. Obviously, a lot of us have got some catching up to do, but ideally, chronic diseases build over time, and you want to be proactive to prevent chronic disease because you don't know how it's going to show up in your body. So the best way to do that is what we do is we eat clean, whole food. So that means it's going to be sourced organically. You're going to see a lot more regenerative agricultural food come available in the coming months, and certainly in a few years, we're going to see a lot of that. It's just another level of adding quality to our domestic food. You want to make sure you're drinking clean water. Probably carbon filter is going to be a better choice there for you. And it's really this lignite extract. The reason we put it in here, my Dr. Fallon and I, we looked at this a few years ago, and it totally changed our health in a matter of days. And it was like, whoa, what's going on here? Which really caused us to do a lot of the deep dive and a lot of the work around Longevity Advantage. So it's a really, I think, a profound shift in our thinking around understanding health and nutrition, and just how important it is to maintaining that to live a long, healthy life. Hopefully you found this helpful. If you want to subscribe, that'll make sure you see upcoming videos. And of course, feel free to share it with anybody who you think might benefit as well. Until next time, have a healthy day.